In a world where speed is glorified, where we measure success by how fast we respond, how quickly we achieve, how instantly we deliver, there lies an ancient paradox that unsettles our modern instincts. The paradox is this: the strongest minds are not the ones who rush ahead. They are the ones who know when to pause, when to slow down, when to wait. Today we scroll, swipe, refresh, and demand answers in seconds. Yet 2,000 years ago, in the busy marketplace of Athens, a man named Socrates walked slowly, spoke carefully, and refused to be hurried. His way of thinking, of questioning, of living, reveals something radical: that wisdom is never in a rush, and strength is found in the art of patience. Imagine the agora, the bustling center of Athens, where merchants sell their wares, politicians debate policies, and ordinary citizens hurry about their business. In the middle of this noisy crowd stands Socrates, barefoot, dressed simply, unbothered by appearances. When approached with a question, he does not answer immediately. He waits, he asks more questions, he examines, he probes. The crowd grows restless. Why does he not just give an answer? Why must he circle around the issue? But Socrates knew something they did not. Quick answers often conceal shallow thinking. Fast responses often reveal pride, not wisdom. And the mind that cannot resist rushing is a mind enslaved to impulse. We have been taught to believe that hesitation is weakness, that slowing down shows uncertainty, that waiting means falling behind. But what if the opposite is true? What if the one who does not rush demonstrates the deepest strength? Socrates embodied this principle. He never claimed to know everything, but he did claim this: that wisdom begins when we admit what we do not know. And to admit ignorance is to slow down. To confess uncertainty is to resist the urge to pretend. That resistance, that pause, is power. Think of how often our lives are driven by haste. An email arrives, and we reply instantly, sometimes with words we regret. A conflict arises, and we rush to defend ourselves, escalating the fire rather than calming it. An opportunity appears, and we leap without looking, only to find it was a trap in disguise. How much suffering comes not from the world itself, but from our speed in reacting to it? Socrates teaches us that strength lies in waiting. By pausing, we give space for clarity to emerge, for emotions to cool, for truth to become visible. The strongest minds don't rush because they understand that time itself is a teacher. This is not the passivity of procrastination, nor the laziness of avoidance. It is the discipline of restraint. A soldier who charges too soon is defeated. A speaker who answers too quickly is exposed. A leader who acts without reflection destroys more than he builds. But the one who waits, who watches, who listens, who measures carefully, this is the one who carries unseen strength. Socrates would spend hours in dialogue, circling around an idea, peeling back its layers, refusing to settle for the easy, fast answer. The crowd may have grown impatient, but in his patience, he uncovered truths that still echo across millennia. There is a story told of Socrates being silent in the midst of a heated discussion. His companions pressed him to speak, to give his opinion, to weigh in. Yet he remained calm, unmoved, observing the chaos around him. Only when the noise had subsided did he begin to ask his gentle, piercing questions. His silence was not emptiness, it was strength gathering itself. His delay was not weakness, it was wisdom sharpening its edge. And when he finally spoke, his words carried weight because they were not rushed. Modern life has trained us to fear silence, to dread slowness, to equate waiting with failure. We want instant success, instant approval, instant certainty. But Socrates whispers across time. The strongest minds don't rush. They don't rush to judgment, because they know how easily appearances deceive. They don't rush to anger, because they know emotions cloud the truth. They don't rush to act, because they know action without thought is chaos in motion. Strength for Socrates was not in speed, but in mastery. Mastery over one's impulses, over one's pride, over the restless demand to always move forward, and mastery is never rushed. Think of a sculptor chiseling marble. One hasty strike can shatter the entire work. But the sculptor who takes his time, who measures each cut, who works with patience, creates something eternal. The mind works in the same way. Ideas carved too quickly crumble. Beliefs built without testing collapse. But the mind that resists rushing, that patiently questions, that slowly sculpts truth, creates wisdom that endures. So, the opening truth we must face is this: rushing is not strength, it is weakness disguised as speed. True strength is the ability to resist the pressure of the moment, to hold your ground, to say, "I will not be hurried into foolishness." This is the strength of Socrates. This is the strength we have forgotten in our age of urgency. To be strong is not to move the fastest, but to move with wisdom, and wisdom requires time. Pause for a moment, here and now. Feel the space around these words. Notice how the world demands your attention, your speed, your immediate reaction. And then imagine stepping back, like Socrates in the agora, unhurried, unmoved, refusing to be dragged by the crowd. That pause, that calm, that deliberate slowness, this is your strength. This is the beginning of a mind that cannot be rushed, a mind that grows clearer, steadier, and stronger with every patient breath. Why do the strongest minds refuse to rush? In a world that rewards speed, where quick decisions are often mistaken for intelligence and fast responses are equated with competence, there lies a quiet paradox. The great philosopher Socrates, whose words still echo across centuries, lived his life in the opposite direction. He was not a man of haste. He was not impressed by quick answers or impulsive actions. For Socrates, strength of mind revealed itself not in speed but in patience, not in rushing but in the calm ability to wait, to reflect and to seek truth slowly. Imagine the Athens of his time, a bustling city filled with merchants shouting prices, politicians giving fiery speeches, and soldiers marching to defend its walls. Life was vibrant, competitive, and fast. To survive in Athens meant being clever, sharp, and quick-witted. Yet here was Socrates, walking barefoot in the marketplace, stopping strangers, craftsmen, generals, and even politicians, asking questions that seemed simple at first, but unfolded into deeper puzzles. He never rushed his dialogues. He would ask, listen, pause, and sometimes even fall silent for long stretches. To his fellow Athenians, this was frustrating. They wanted answers, conclusions, quick certainties. But Socrates understood that wisdom was not a sprint. It was not about who answered first, but about who understood most deeply. The strongest minds don't rush because they are not enslaved by the clock or by the pressure of others. They recognize that rushing is often a mask for insecurity. A person who rushes to speak fears silence, one who rushes to decide fears uncertainty, one who rushes to act fears stillness. Socrates, on the other hand, was unafraid of all these things. He could stand in silence, as he once did on the battlefield, lost in thought for hours while soldiers around him marveled. He was not concerned with appearing fast or decisive, but with being right, being true, being wise. Now contrast this with our modern condition. How many of us feel pressured to reply instantly to a message, to decide in the heat of a meeting, to chase every opportunity with urgency? We live in a culture that praises, move fast and break things. But what gets broken most often is our own clarity of thought. When we rush, we risk misunderstanding, misjudging, and misstepping. Socrates teaches us that the strongest mind is the one that can resist the urge to move quickly when wisdom demands slowness. The opening lesson, then, is not about laziness, nor is it about passivity. To move slowly, in the Socratic sense, is an act of strength, because it requires mastery over impulses. Anyone can blurt out the first thought that comes to mind. Anyone can jump into action without reflection. But it takes discipline to pause. It takes courage to wait while others demand speed. It takes strength to say, "I do not yet know, let us examine this further." Socrates was unashamed to admit his ignorance, And in doing so, he revealed that slowness, humility, and patience are not weaknesses but signs of true wisdom. Think of a river after heavy rain. The water rushes, chaotic and muddy, carrying with it debris, dirt, and broken branches. It is fast, loud, and powerful, but it is not clear. Only when the river slows, when time allows the sediment to settle, does the water become transparent again. The mind works in the same way. When rushing, thoughts are turbulent, mixed with emotion, fear, and pressure. But when we allow time, when we let stillness settle over us, clarity emerges. The strongest minds understand this, just as Socrates did. This opening paradox, that strength is found in patience, not speed, invites us to rethink what we call success. In school, the child who answers fastest is praised. In business, the company that responds quickest is admired. In life, the person who seems decisive is often considered wise. Yet history proves otherwise. Socrates did not rush, yet his ideas still outlast the empires and armies of his time. Those who rushed to condemn him, to silence him, to force an outcome quickly, where are their names now? Forgotten. But Socrates' slow, deliberate way of thinking lives on, shaping philosophy, ethics, and human understanding. When we open with this lesson, we are confronted with a choice in our own lives. Do we want to be the rushing river, fast and noisy but unclear, or the still water, calm, deep, and reflective? Do we want to live by the stopwatch of others, always proving our quickness, or do we want to live by the timeless pursuit of wisdom? Socrates' life shows us that the latter, though slower, is infinitely stronger, and perhaps the deepest irony of all is that rushing often makes us slower in the long run. A decision made in haste may take years to repair. A word spoken too quickly may wound a friendship permanently. A careless choice may redirect the course of a life. The strongest minds avoid such waste, not because they fear action, but because they know that deliberate action, taken at the right time, is far more effective than constant rushing. Socrates' way of not rushing was not passive delay, it was an active search for the right moment, the right understanding, and the right truth. So as we begin this reflection, let us keep in mind the central paradox. The strongest minds don't rush because they are not slaves to time, fear, or the judgment of others. They move when it is right to move, and they wait when waiting is wise. Like Socrates, they are more concerned with truth than with appearances. And in a world that glorifies speed, their patience becomes a radical form of strength. If the strongest minds don't rush, then what do they do instead? Socrates gave us an answer that has become legendary. They ask questions. But not just any questions. Socrates perfected the art of questioning as a way to slow down thought, to peel back assumptions, and to move closer to truth. To him, questions were not weapons to trap others but lanterns to light the darkness of confusion. And through this, he demonstrated that the mind's greatest power lies not in quick answers but in careful inquiry. Consider the way conversations often unfold today. Someone asks a question, and the expectation is an immediate answer. Social media, news debates, even casual discussions thrive on quick replies. There is little patience for pausing, for reflecting, for turning the question over carefully. But Socrates treated a question like a precious object, something to be examined from all sides, turned in the light, tested against reality. He slowed things down deliberately. When someone gave him a quick answer, he rarely accepted it at face value. Instead, he asked another question, and then another, each one digging deeper, exposing contradictions and forcing clarity. This process became known as the Socratic method, and it remains one of the most powerful intellectual tools humanity has ever developed. At its heart, the Socratic method teaches us that wisdom grows through dialogue, not monologue. By asking questions, Socrates showed that what people think they know often collapses under examination. For instance, when someone claimed to understand the meaning of justice, Socrates would gently but persistently ask, "What is justice?" He would listen carefully, then probe. If justice is what benefits the strong, does that mean injustice benefits the weak? If justice is giving people what they deserve, who decides what they deserve? Slowly, through these questions, his partner would realize that their neat definition was incomplete. Instead of rushing to proclaim a final truth, Socrates forced them into the discomfort of uncertainty, a discomfort that eventually gave birth to deeper understanding. Why is this important? Because rushing thrives on the illusion of certainty. We convince ourselves that we know enough, that we must answer quickly, that hesitation is weakness. But Socrates flipped this assumption. He believed the beginning of wisdom was to admit ignorance. To say, "I don't know," was not a failure, but a first step. Once we admit that our knowledge is limited, we open ourselves to learning. Strong minds don't rush to prove they know, they slow down to ask what they don't. Think of how this applies to modern life. In our careers, relationships, and personal choices, we are constantly pressured to provide answers. A manager expects a plan immediately. A partner asks for a decision on the spot. A friend demands advice right away. In these moments, the temptation is to rush. Yet the Socratic way invites us to pause and respond with a question instead. What do you think the best option is? Why do you believe this is the right path? What assumptions are we making here? By questioning, we slow down the process, and in slowing down, we allow space for clarity. The art of questioning also teaches humility. Socrates never claimed to be the wisest man. In fact, he often declared that he knew nothing. And yet, by asking questions, he revealed that others knew less than they thought. His humility was not false modesty, but genuine openness to truth. He was not in a race to have the smartest answer, he was on a journey to uncover what was real. This mindset transforms the way we think. Instead of rushing to defend our opinions, we learn to test them. Instead of clinging to assumptions, we learn to examine them. And in doing so, we free ourselves from the trap of false certainty. Some might argue that questioning slows progress, that if we never settle on answers, we will remain stuck in endless debate. But Socrates would remind us that hasty answers often lead to false progress. A society, an organization, or even a person who moves quickly in the wrong direction is not progressing at all. By questioning, we may appear slower, but we are laying a foundation that is solid. A building constructed quickly on weak ground will collapse. One built carefully on strong foundations will endure. The same is true of our thoughts, decisions, and actions. Let's take a simple example. A person considering a career change. If they rush, they might jump into a new field because it looks exciting or pays more. But if they apply the Socratic way, they begin by asking themselves questions. Why do I want this change? What do I value most in work? What am I willing to sacrifice? What assumptions am I making about success? Through these questions, they may discover hidden motivations, false expectations, or overlooked priorities. The decision made more slowly will ultimately be wiser and more sustainable. The art of questioning also deepens our relationships. Instead of rushing to advise or argue, we can listen and inquire. Imagine a friend who is upset. Instead of rushing in with, "Here's what you should do," try the Socratic approach. Why does this bother you so much? What outcome do you hope for? What do you fear if you do nothing? By asking rather than telling, we give them the gift of reflection. We slow the pace of conversation and help them arrive at their own clarity. This not only strengthens understanding but builds trust, because the person feels truly heard. Socrates' method shows us that questions are more powerful than statements. Statements close doors. This is the truth. Questions open them. What if the truth is different? Statements rush toward finality, questions linger in possibility. And it is in possibility that wisdom grows. The strongest minds, then, do not rush to seal the door of inquiry. They keep it open, even if it means walking a longer path. In our noisy world, where answers are instantly available at the touch of a button, it feels counterintuitive to slow down with questions. Why ask when Google can tell you? But the wisdom of Socrates reminds us that not all answers can be found in information. Data may tell us facts, but it does not give us meaning. Knowledge can be delivered instantly, but understanding must be cultivated. Questions are the soil in which understanding grows, and no soil yields fruit the moment it is planted. It must be tilled, watered, and given time. Thus, the art of questioning is not just an intellectual exercise but a way of living. It demands patience, humility, and courage, the same virtues that define strength of mind. When we adopt this method, we resist the rush of superficial answers and embrace the slower journey toward wisdom. We accept that not knowing is not weakness, but the beginning of real knowledge. We see that questions, not hasty conclusions, are the compass of the strong mind. And so, Socrates gives us a second lesson. If the strongest minds don't rush, it is because they are not obsessed with having the quickest answers. Instead, they honor the art of asking, of wondering, of peeling back layer after layer until truth, or something closer to it, emerges. This is how they avoid the trap of haste, and this is how they gain strength, by questioning, always questioning, never rushing to the illusion of certainty. Silence. For many people, it feels uncomfortable, even unbearable. When a conversation falls quiet, we rush to fill the gap. When we sit alone without music, phones, or distractions, we feel restless. Silence has become something we avoid, something that makes us uneasy. Yet for Socrates and for many ancient thinkers, silence was not a void to be feared but a space of power. It was in silence that the mind sharpened, the heart calmed, and wisdom slowly revealed itself. The strongest minds, therefore, are not afraid of silence. They know its strength, and they use it as a tool. There are stories told about Socrates on the battlefield. When other soldiers were preparing, strategizing, or nervously pacing, Socrates could stand still for hours, lost in thought, silent. His fellow warriors marveled at his ability to remain so calm, so unmoved, even when chaos surrounded him. For him, silence was not emptiness but presence. It was not a lack of words but a gathering of strength. In the quiet, he could observe clearly. In the stillness, he could think deeply. We often confuse silence with passivity, but Socrates shows us that it is the opposite. Silence is active discipline. It requires strength to resist the urge to speak, to react, to rush. It is easy to blurt out words in anger or impatience. It is easy to drown discomfort with noise. But it is difficult to hold the tongue, to sit with tension, to let silence stretch without fleeing from it. The strongest minds cultivate this ability because they understand that silence creates room for clarity. Consider how often mistakes are born from the absence of silence. A heated argument escalates because no one pauses to breathe. A poor decision is made because no one waited long enough to think. An opportunity is lost because noise drowned out the quiet signals of intuition. Silence could have saved all these moments. A brief pause before speaking, a night's sleep before deciding, a moment of quiet listening before acting. The power of silence lies not in doing nothing, but in making space for wisdom to enter. The modern world, however, has trained us to fear silence. Notifications ping, news cycles run endlessly, music and chatter fill every corner. Even when alone, people reach for their phones, desperate to avoid the discomfort of stillness. Yet this avoidance weakens the mind. Without silence, thoughts remain scattered. Without quiet, we cannot hear the deeper truths that whisper beneath the surface noise. Socrates, by contrast, embraced silence as his ally. His pauses in conversation were not awkward gaps but deliberate acts, signaling that thought was taking place. That words would come only when ready. There is also humility in silence. To speak constantly is to assume one always has something worth saying. To remain silent at times is to recognize the limits of one's knowledge. Socrates famously admitted that he knew nothing, and his silences reflected this humility. He was willing to wait, to listen, to let others reveal themselves through their words while he absorbed carefully. Silence gave him power, not because it made him dominant, but because it made him receptive. In relationships, too, silence has its strength. Think of moments when listening quietly matters more than responding. A friend grieving does not need a rush of advice. They need presence, stillness, the comfort of someone who can sit in silence without turning away. A leader in a crisis does not need to shout every command, but sometimes to pause, to observe, to think before speaking. Silence, when used with intention, communicates depth, steadiness, and care. The strongest minds understand this. They are not afraid to let silence stretch, because they know it speaks more loudly than noise. Philosophically, silence is also tied to the search for truth. Words are limited tools. They can point toward reality, but they cannot fully capture it. Socrates knew that sometimes, after all the questioning, after all the dialogue, what remained was silence, the recognition that ultimate truth may be beyond human grasp. To accept silence here is not despair but wisdom. It acknowledges the mystery of life, the vastness of what cannot be explained. In this way, silence becomes not a lack of answers, but the most honest response of all. Let's bring this to our own lives. How often do we rush to reply in a conversation, only to later regret what we said? How often do we fill every quiet moment with noise, leaving no space to hear our own thoughts? What would happen if we, like Socrates, allowed silence into our daily rhythm? Perhaps we would make better choices, speak with more care, listen with more attention. Perhaps we would discover that silence does not isolate us, but connects us to ourselves, to others, and even to something greater. Practical ways to embrace silence are deceptively simple. Try beginning your day with a few minutes of quiet before touching your phone. In conversations, allow yourself to pause before responding, even if it feels uncomfortable. In arguments, resist the urge to fire back immediately and instead take a breath, a moment of silence before deciding what to say. Over time, these practices transform silence from something strange into something strong. They train the mind to slow down, to see more clearly, and to act with greater wisdom. Socrates would remind us that silence is not the absence of life, but the ground on which life stands. Just as music depends on the spaces between notes, thought depends on the spaces between words. Without silence, sound becomes noise. Without pauses, thought becomes chaos. The strongest minds are those that can create silence within themselves, even in the midst of external noise. They can step back, resist the rush, and wait for clarity to emerge. So, the lesson of silence is this: don't fear it, don't flee from it, don't rush to fill it. Embrace it as a discipline, as a source of power. Let it guide your speech, your decisions, your understanding. For in silence lies the strength to resist haste, the clarity to see truth, and the wisdom to act only when the time is right. And if Socrates could stand in silence on the battlefield, then surely we can find the courage to invite silence into our daily lives. Patience. The very word feels old-fashioned, almost out of place in a culture built on instant gratification. We are surrounded by devices that deliver information in seconds, food in minutes, and communication in an instant. Waiting feels like a waste. Yet Socrates, and many of the philosophers who followed him, would remind us that patience is not weakness or delay, but one of the deepest forms of strength. To be patient is to master time rather than be mastered by it. It is to resist the pressure of urgency and remain grounded in clarity. For Socrates, patience was not an abstract virtue, but a lived reality. He endured trials, ridicule, and even his eventual death sentence with calm acceptance. When his friends urged him to escape prison after being unjustly condemned, Socrates refused. He told them that rushing away from fate, even when unjust, would violate his principles. He would rather wait patiently for death than betray his commitment to truth. To many, this seemed foolish. To Socrates, it was the ultimate display of strength. Patience was his shield, allowing him to meet even death without panic or desperation. But why is patience strength? Because impatience is the voice of fear. We rush when we are afraid of missing out, afraid of discomfort, afraid of losing control. Patience, by contrast, is the ability to sit with fear and not be ruled by it. The one who can wait without panic, who can hold steady in uncertainty, is stronger than the one who rushes into action out of anxiety. Patience is the discipline of trusting that not all outcomes must be forced, that time itself can be an ally. Think of a seed planted in the soil. No matter how much we water it, no matter how much we wish it to grow, it will not become a tree overnight. Impatience would have us dig it up, check its progress, and in doing so, kill it. Patience allows us to wait, to trust the process of time, knowing that growth is invisible at first but inevitable in its season. The strongest minds live like this. They do not rush every moment of life into immediate results. They plant, they nurture, and they wait. Modern life makes patience rare. From social media's endless scroll to same-day deliveries, everything pushes us towards speed. We feel frustrated if a video buffers for more than a few seconds, or if a response to a message takes more than a few minutes. In this environment, patience feels unnatural, but Socratic wisdom calls us to remember that speed is not always strength. Sometimes the strongest thing we can do is pause, wait, and endure. This endurance trains the mind to resist the tyranny of immediacy. Patience also creates perspective. When we rush, we see only what is right in front of us. When we wait, patterns emerge. Time reveals what haste cannot. Imagine someone facing betrayal by a friend. In the rush of hurt, they may lash out, end the relationship, or say words they cannot take back. But if they allow patience to guide them, they might see more clearly. Perhaps that the betrayal was born of misunderstanding, or that reconciliation is possible. Patience gives time for emotion to settle, for wisdom to speak, for truth to appear. Socrates practiced patience in dialogue as well. He never hurried his questions or demanded quick conclusions. He let discussions unfold slowly, sometimes over hours, sometimes leaving them unresolved. He understood that wisdom cannot be rushed, that minds need time to wrestle with uncertainty. By being patient, he allowed others to see their own contradictions and come to insights that would never have surfaced under pressure. This patience was not laziness but confidence, the confidence that truth would emerge in its own time. There is also a moral strength in patience. To wait without bitterness, to endure without complaint, is a discipline of character. The Stoics, who built on Socratic thought, saw patience as a form of courage. Marcus Aurelius wrote of bearing life's difficulties with calm endurance, like a rock against which waves crash, but which does not move. This patience is not passive submission, but active resilience. It says, "I can withstand this. I will not be broken by waiting." In this sense, patience is the armor of the strong. Consider how this plays out in our own lives. We rush into decisions, relationships, careers, often out of fear that time is slipping away. Yet many of the greatest mistakes are born from impatience. A marriage entered too quickly. A business started without preparation. An argument escalated instead of allowed to cool. Each of these could have been saved by patience. To wait is not to waste time but to protect it from being lost to foolishness. Patience also connects us with something eternal. When we practice patience, we step out of the frantic rhythm of the moment and into the slower rhythm of nature, of life itself. The sun rises and sets without rushing. Seasons turn at their own pace. Great rivers carve valleys over centuries. These forces remind us that true power is not hurried but steady. Socrates, by embracing patience, aligned himself with this deeper order. He showed that the strongest minds move not at the pace of panic, but at the pace of truth. But let us be clear, patience does not mean doing nothing. It is not passivity or weakness. Rather, it is the discipline of waiting for the right moment to act. A patient archer does not release the arrow until the target is clear. A patient sailor waits for the right wind. A patient philosopher waits until thought is ripened. The strongest minds are those that can act swiftly when needed but never prematurely. Their patience gives their actions weight, precision, and impact. So how do we practice this strength of patience? Start small. When waiting in line, resist the urge to distract yourself with your phone. Simply wait. When faced with a decision, give yourself more time than feels comfortable. Sit with uncertainty instead of rushing to resolve it. When anger rises, pause before responding. These simple acts train the mind to endure waiting without fear. Over time, patience becomes less of a struggle and more of a natural posture, a strength that anchors us against the currents of haste. Socrates showed us that patience is the companion of wisdom. He did not rush to escape death, nor to impose answers, nor to force outcomes. He trusted that time itself was part of the path to truth, and in doing so, he demonstrated a strength far greater than speed. For anyone can rush, but only the strong can wait. When Socrates walked the streets of Athens, asking his relentless questions, he rarely hurried. His way of thinking and living carried a calm weight, as though time itself bent to his pace rather than the other way around. To him, rushing was never a sign of strength, but of fear. Fear of being left behind, of missing out, of being overtaken by others, of losing the race that society insisted we were all running. Patience, on the other hand, was an expression of inner stability. It required confidence, composure, and trust that one's choices and efforts were aligned with something deeper than the frenzy of the crowd. The connection between rushing and fear is clearer than we realize. When we rush into decisions, it is usually because we fear uncertainty. We fear that if we stop to think, the opportunity will vanish. We fear that others will surpass us. We fear silence, waiting, and not knowing. That fear disguises itself as urgency, convincing us that action, any action, is better than stillness. But Socrates showed us that rushing often blinds us more than it helps us. He insisted on asking questions until clarity emerged, even if others found the process slow or frustrating. To him, clarity was worth more than speed. Think about how often our lives are driven by fear disguised as urgency. A student cramming before an exam is rushing because of fear, not the love of learning, but fear of failure. A businessperson chasing deal after deal without pause is often moved not by a noble vision, but by fear of falling behind competitors. Even in relationships, many rush into commitments or decisions because they fear being alone, fear missing their chance, fear being judged. Rushing becomes a shield against fear, but a fragile one that collapses quickly. Patience, however, is born from strength. To wait calmly is not easy. It requires the discipline to resist fear's pull and to trust that things unfold in their proper time. Socrates himself exemplified this when he stood trial in Athens. Accused unjustly, he did not rush to defend himself with tricks or manipulations. He calmly spoke his truth, patiently explained his philosophy, and accepted the consequences without panic. His composure showed strength. He feared neither judgment nor death, because he trusted the integrity of his own choices. That patience, rooted in strength, made him unshakable. Modern life constantly pressures us to rush. Notifications, deadlines, and the race for success all whisper the same command: hurry, or you'll fall behind. But if we look closely, much of this urgency is hollow. What is it that we're really afraid of? Often, it is the fear of being seen as less than, less successful, less accomplished, less admired. Socratic patience frees us from this trap. When you are strong in yourself, when you know your values and what you truly seek, you do not panic when others surge ahead. You understand that rushing would compromise clarity and peace of mind. Patience is also practical wisdom. Rushed decisions are frequently poor ones. Think of how many mistakes are made in haste, words spoken that wound, investments that collapse, relationships entered without care. When fear drives speed, clarity is sacrificed. But when strength drives patience, clarity blossoms. You see more clearly because you are not clouded by panic. You listen more deeply because you are not desperate to speak. You act more wisely because you have waited for the right time. In philosophy, patience is also tied to the acceptance of what we cannot control. Socrates, like the later Stoics, understood that time itself is not ours to command. Seasons change, opportunities arise and fade, people come and go, all on a schedule beyond our control. To rush is to deny this truth, to fight against reality. But to be patient is to flow with reality, to trust that when the right moment comes, you will act with clarity and strength. This is not passivity. It is the discipline of aligning with life's natural rhythms rather than letting fear dictate your pace. We can see the truth of this even in simple, everyday experiences. Consider planting a seed. If you rush and demand it grow today, you'll only frustrate yourself and perhaps even destroy the seed by overwatering or moving it constantly. The strong person plants, nurtures, and waits, knowing that growth cannot be forced. Fear says, it's not happening fast enough. Strength says, it will happen when it should. The one who waits calmly is not weak. They are secure enough to let nature unfold in its own time. The challenge, then, is to look within and recognize when our actions are driven by fear and when they are rooted in strength. Ask yourself, am I rushing because I am afraid of missing out, or am I waiting because I trust in my path? Fear makes us slaves to time, but strength gives us mastery over it. Socratic wisdom shows us that the strongest minds are not those who run the fastest, but those who walk steadily, guided by patience and clarity. To embody this lesson, practice small acts of patience daily. When standing in a long line, instead of fuming, notice your thoughts and calm your breathing. When faced with an urgent decision, pause to reflect before reacting. When tempted to chase what others are doing, remind yourself that fear is not your guide, strength is. Over time, this practice strengthens the inner calm that makes patience possible. Socrates' way shows us that rushing is not strength, but surrender to fear. Patience, on the other hand, is mastery, the power to hold steady in a world that constantly pulls us to hurry. To live this truth is to live with the unshakable strength of those who know that clarity and wisdom are worth the wait. Success without patience often collapses, while patient effort builds lasting results. Socrates understood this in a way that still rings true today. A person who races toward achievement without laying the foundations of character, discipline, and wisdom builds a fragile structure. It might look impressive for a time, but the moment pressure arrives, it falls apart. History is full of examples: leaders who rose quickly but crumbled under scandal, businesses that skyrocketed but collapsed because they grew too fast without stability, relationships that ignited with passion but fell apart without the patience to truly understand each other. The principle is simple: speed without depth does not last. Patient effort, by contrast, has a quiet strength. It builds slowly, brick by brick, forming something that can withstand time. Think of a tree that grows gradually over decades. Its roots dig deep into the soil. Its trunk strengthens with every season, and when storms come, it stands firm. Socrates saw wisdom as something that must be cultivated in this way, patiently, through conversation, reflection, and practice. Quick answers, quick gains, quick victories, they are tempting, but they rarely endure. True success demands patience because patience gives depth, and depth gives permanence. In our own lives, this lesson shows itself whenever we attempt shortcuts. Whether it's rushing through education, chasing instant wealth, or forcing recognition, the results rarely satisfy for long. Patient effort, on the other hand, may feel slow, but it builds confidence and stability along the way. Every step teaches us something. Every obstacle strengthens us, every delay shapes our character. What we gain patiently becomes part of us in a way that cannot be easily taken away. The strongest minds know this, and they resist the temptation of rushing toward shallow victories. And this leads us to another point. The art of waiting opens doors that rushing slams shut. We often think that speed guarantees opportunity, but the opposite is often true. When we rush, we close ourselves off from possibilities. We are so focused on moving forward that we miss what lies to the side, or just behind us, or in the pauses between actions. Waiting allows us to see. Waiting creates space for reflection, creativity, and new perspectives. Many of the greatest breakthroughs in philosophy, art, and science were not the product of rushing, but of allowing ideas to unfold over time. Socrates himself did not write books or deliver speeches in haste. His method was dialogue, slow, deliberate questioning that forced both himself and others to wait for truth to reveal itself. This was not just a teaching style, it was a way of living. He believed wisdom was uncovered not by racing toward answers, but by lingering with questions. When you wait with openness, insights come that would have been invisible in the rush. Opportunities appear when you are patient enough to notice them. By contrast, rushing often blinds you because your vision is narrowed to the next step alone. To wait well is to cultivate trust in yourself, in others, and in the natural unfolding of events. Waiting does not mean passivity, it means readiness. The patient person is not idle, but attentive, alert to the moment when action will matter most. The one who rushes acts without clarity, the one who waits acts with precision. This is why Socratic wisdom values patience so highly. The art of waiting is the art of allowing life to reveal its possibilities, rather than forcing them prematurely. But waiting and patience are not only practical, they are also profoundly tied to inner peace. Fear and anxiety thrive in rushing. When you hurry, your mind is scattered. You are consumed by the future, imagining everything that could go wrong if you do not act quickly enough. You feel hunted by time. Inner peace, however, emerges when you release the need to rush. When you allow yourself to be still, even in uncertainty, you reclaim control over your own mind. Socrates believed that peace of mind came from knowing what is within your control and what is not. Rushing often means trying to control what cannot be controlled, forcing outcomes, demanding immediate results, fighting against the natural flow of life. This struggle creates stress and discontent. Patience, by contrast, is an acceptance of the limits of control. It is the willingness to let things unfold while maintaining your integrity and readiness. When you live this way, fear loses its grip. Anxiety loosens. You begin to experience calm, even in difficult circumstances, because you are no longer enslaved by urgency. This brings us to perhaps the deepest lesson. The strongest minds align with time rather than fight against it. To align with time means to understand that everything unfolds in its season. Socrates embodied this even in his death. When sentenced, he did not beg for more time or scramble for escape. He accepted the timing of events with calmness. His strength was not in bending time to his will, but in aligning himself with its flow. This is not resignation. It is wisdom. It is the recognition that life has rhythms, and to fight against them is futile, but to harmonize with them is freedom. The strongest minds, then, are not those who conquer time, but those who cooperate with it. They do not demand that everything happen instantly, nor do they despair when things take longer than expected. They accept, adapt, and persist. This strength allows them to remain calm in crisis, steady in uncertainty, and clear when others are clouded by haste. In a world that measures value by speed, how fast we achieve, how quickly we respond, this way of living is radically liberating. It shifts the focus from racing toward the future to living wisely in the present. And so we return to the central theme: why the strongest minds don't rush. Rushing is not a mark of power but of fear. Patience is not a weakness but a profound strength. Socrates showed us this with his life, his teaching, and even his death. He showed that wisdom unfolds slowly, that truth is worth waiting for, that peace comes from aligning with time rather than resisting it. He showed that success built patiently endures, while hurried triumphs collapse. He showed that waiting is not emptiness but a door to deeper understanding. For us, the challenge is to live these truths in our own noisy, hurried world. We are told that faster is always better, that to wait is to fall behind. But Socratic wisdom whispers something different. That to wait with strength is to move with clarity, that to act with patience is to build something lasting, that to live aligned with time is to live with peace. So the next time you feel the pull to rush, whether in decisions, ambitions, or relationships, pause. Ask yourself what drives the urgency, fear, or strength. Remember that the strongest minds are not those who move first, but those who move wisely. Remember Socrates, walking calmly through the streets of Athens, unhurried, questioning, teaching, embodying patience. His example invites us to live not as slaves to urgency, but as masters of time, building lives rooted in clarity, peace, and enduring strength. That is the legacy of a strong mind. That is the wisdom of not rushing.